I move to reduce the salaries and benefits in the police department in the general fund by $4.5 million and reapportion those funds to the following categories. $3.5 million to the public safety sales tax fund for the purposes of funding the reconstruction and relocation of Fire Station 5 in Ward 5. $715,000.
Can I ask you to pause a minute? All right, I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm, and I know you can hear me out there, and this is a very passionate topic. But remember, we do have a meeting to conduct, and we cannot hear. So if we need to shut the doors, we will, but I'm asking all of you, please, we do have business to conduct tonight, and we're happy to do it with you here, but we need to be able to hear each other. I apologize for interrupting. Councilmember Scott, will you please start over?
Yes. I move to reduce the salaries and benefits in the police department in the general fund by $4.5 million and reapportion those funds safety sales tax fund for the purposes of funding the reconstruction and relocation of Fire Station 5 in Ward 5. $715,000 to the capital fund for stormwater drainage and storm sewer systems projects. $235,000 for the implementation of an internal audit function, and $50,000 to the police department to provide funding for additional officer sensitivity training. Do you have a second?
Second.
We have a second? Yeah, this is Councilman Holman. Okay, are there any comments from council regarding this amendment? Councilmember Wilson.
Where that Fire Station 5 is at, it is, they are, as you know, tax-paying citizens who often speak about how they do not receive the same services. This amendment basically cuts the salary and benefits of the police department in half. And while I don't expect it to pass, I do expect it to cause a conversation about those very things, about how we solve this problem. And so thank you. You're about to hear me. I don't always speak at length at the council meetings. I'm usually pretty concise, but I do want you guys to hear my perspective and my experience in the city of Norman. Beginning, and I saw on our slide earlier from the presentation from our chief that Grand Prairie, Texas was also on the slide. When I was in my senior year in Grand Prairie, I witnessed from the passenger seat of my friend's vehicle a gun pulled on my friend in the driver's seat by an officer because he wouldn't give the officer his ID. In 2013, in Norman, Oklahoma, my friend's home was burglarized. They called the police. The officer proceeded to conduct a criminal interrogation on the victim, a black man, asking if he sold drugs and accusing them of such. Not only did that happen, was he dismissed, but there was also no follow-up on the investigation of his home, which was burglarized. In 2014, there was a rape outside of the establishment that I used to work at, not of me, but by my friend. There was no follow-up and no justice. In September of 2015, on the first day of the last semester of my senior year of my undergraduate degree, I was assaulted in the street by my home in the Miller District, Ward 4. I called the police and gave them details of the assault as well as the make, model, and license plate of the vehicle to search for, and the officer, after taking my report, proceeded to turn off his recording device and tell me that sex crimes are not treated as a priority in the city of Norman. Unless you deface property or try to pass a hot check, the case would not take priority. And there was no follow-up. When I was a teacher at Moore High School in 2016, there was a student who was clearly suffering from mental health issues that busted into my classroom, screaming and crying for help, as the student resource officer grabbed him and dragged him out my first period. In 2017, on April 20th, at Moore High School, when I was a teacher, one of my freshman Latinx students told me that the student resource officer stopped him and frisked him on his way back from lunch, suspecting that he had cannabis on him. He did not. That was my 5th hour of freshman. In 2018, Marconia Kessie was dragged, dehumanized, and his life was disregarded. And as I spoke earlier, this is a violation of those 8 can't wait, the duty to intervene by the police officer who witnessed the other one violate the use of force continuum. Cassie died in police custody, and this affects me personally as it affects our community. Here's 2020. I received a phone call from an Indigenous mother whose daughter was violently raped. Her 19-year-old daughter was disbelieved, disrespected, and disregarded by Officer Barber, who told her at Norman Regional Hospital that she shouldn't have been drinking. In 2020, during the pandemic, there was an email that circulated our Norman Police Department that displayed white supremacist and KKK imagery. I would, again, commend the officer that condemned this behavior and brought it to their attention so that it could be addressed by the department. The investigation was internal. And again, this is personal for me because it is personal for our community. And this is very personal, this next piece. I called the Norman Police Department in May, late May, due to a situation I was experiencing with a stalker. I called roughly 11:35 in the night on a Tuesday night, and 2 officers showed up pretty quickly, no masks until I asked, and then I told them my 6-week-long experience. They remained silent. I mentioned that I had a witness, but it wasn't until I called Major Jackson in the middle of the night that they began taking a report of the incident. When I asked them to ask my neighbor, when they blatantly disbelieved me on my doorstep about my experience as a victim, and asked them to ask my neighbor, an eyewitness, they said, "Do you want us to wake her up in the middle of the night?" And I said, yes. I mentioned overtime earlier. There were 2 officers who showed up on my doorstep and said, this is the MO of this person, of the person who I said I believed to be stalking me in the middle of the night. This is their MO. So they weren't going to take any action until I called their further supervisor, the Major Jackson, who did promptly speak to them, and they took a report then, and then sent Officer Vincent to my home, who did go indeed wake up my neighbor in the middle of the night. But when Officer Vincent showed up, he asked, "Is there anything, what's going on?" And the officer said, "We're about wrapped up here." He said, he asked me, he goes, "Counselor, how are you? Not good. Okay. And then is there anything else?" I said, "Yeah, I think these guys need some sensitivity training." Because before he got there, I asked, "Why do you think I'm frustrated?" And they said, "You don't like us. You don't like police." And I said, "Try again." And then he said, "Because you're being stalked and we didn't catch the guy." And I was very close. It was very close. So we did come. Officer Vincent did go and wake up my neighbor, who gave a witness account to this experience that for weeks, that I had been stalked. And when we came back to my place, to my home, he told me that I would be well taken care of, and I appreciate that. I am a city councilor. I had to make it clear on my doorstep. I had to call the major in order for me to be taken seriously in a low-income, high-crime neighborhood, just to be believed by people that I pay and represent, frankly. And I, putting myself aside, pleaded with him that if it weren't me, if I weren't a white woman, if I weren't a white counselor, what would have happened? Who else is experiencing this? Who is being disbelieved? Who is being further endangered? I was endangered on my doorstep. And it wasn't until the next day that the major, again, thank you. I got a call from Detective Kelly. Thank you, by the way, Detective Kelly, for following up with me again weeks later, the first time I've been followed up with, when I have been assaulted on more than one occasion. Like I told you, in 2015, I was assaulted and there was no follow-up. But Officer Kelly followed up with me this time. The major and Officer Casillas, again, thank you. Officer Casillas came to my home and exposed all of the weak places in my house and accidentally also opened up my neighbor's window. So I bought her a window alarm as well. And Mayor Clark also immediately, when she found out, when I told her when I had to exit that council meeting, sent her husband over to my home to install lights so that I would be further protected. I'm in a very, very privileged position, and there are many who are not, who are experiencing this. And if I am being disbelieved, disregarded on my doorstep, then there is much worse going on. And that's why I made this amendment, is to have this conversation. Because the purpose of our police is to protect and to serve. And if property is taking a higher priority than my body, then they are not upholding their pledge.
Come on, guys. Come on.
So I'm willing to accept amendments.
As a man of uncertain multi-ethnic heritage, I cannot empathize.
3 minutes. Please.
Yeah, that's right. I really don't know. Okay?
We got it for you.
But I cannot empathize, Councilor Scott, with your experiences as a white woman. I cannot. And I will not pretend to do so. I will not pretend to share the experiences that anybody else has either. Allow me to share a moment of mine. In 1978, I was 15 and a half years old at the original Oklahoma Jam. Intoxicated and under the influence of other substances, I thought I should attack the police. Within seconds after spitting on them and throwing things at them, my arm was contorted across my back and I was thrown face down on the ground. Shortly thereafter, many batons were pounded into my chest and my gut, and my face was forcibly slammed. Shortly thereafter, batons were pounded into my chest and gut, and my face was forcibly thrown into the patrol car hood. I continued to fight and somehow broke loose of the handcuffs. Then they forced me to the ground again and put a second pair on. I carry a scar right here on my wrist, still to this day, as a result of that experience.
Why did he pull that gun?
It's nice to have the respect of those other people in the room.
No respect.
You had no respect for us, huh?
Every time. Then, in 1996, a Norman cop stalked me for months because I had in the past dated his girlfriend. Every time he saw me, it was, one of these days, you're going to F up, and I'm going to be there to make sure it happens. Eventually, he pulled me over and was able to charge me because a passenger in my car had paraphernalia. I was not under the influence. I was not in possession of anything. He was later charged 6 months later for the sexual assault of his 11-year-old girlfriend's daughter. I was still charged with that paraphernalia, and I still have it on my record today. Do I hold the actions of these officers against such good officers like Officer Owen, Officer Steege, Officer Hopkins, or Officer Mosby? No, I don't. I don't hold any ill will to any of those fine officers that serve for the Norman Police Department. Not any. Do we defund because of some officers' actions? I oppose the defunding of police. And I know that one of you guys have shared police training, but I know that all of you have been invited to participate in the Community Police Academy. I don't think any of you have. So unless you've walked in their shoes, I would ask you to seriously consider opposing Councilor Scott's amendment. Walk in their shoes. Attend that.
Next.
Also, several of you have mentioned you thought that the SRO program had to
Why
do
is his
with
mic
school
still on?
shootings. Had to do with school shootings. All right, now, what happened was you have...
Order, man. 3 minutes.
A lady who served for 2 years as PTA council president, she knows the effectiveness of the SRO program.
Oh, does she?
She knows full well.
Uh-huh.
And the rest of you that don't know, have you had a conversation with our mayor? I think not. And my partner started a program called the Kitchen Project to help homeless women get
White privilege.
It was not funded by you guys. It was not participated by any of you guys.
Taking our lives.
Senator
see that you
Ross
signed?
Ulbricht and there's David Rosecrans, because homelessness, and the media. It's not a
No one
party.
seated you there at that time.
Time's up.
No one seated you there at that time. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Order, Mayor. Order, Mayor. No one seated them at their time.
Thank you.
So, we should
Mayor,
be aware.
please,
Thank you,
Mayor.
time's up. Indian Road, Joseph Leon Love, and Robert Davis.
Mayor, point of
These
order.
are
3
just three
minutes.
of the Norman teachers charged
White
with
privilege
sexual
right
abuse
here.
Your time
and
is up.
sexual assault of their
White man
students.
privilege.
You tried to silence a
Just
black
the
mother.
past 5 years.
We have let
Do
multiple
we
people
defund,
over.
do we defund education?
You tried to pause public commenting when I went
That
over.
break their children in Norman public schools.
Our children are dying. Our children are dying. Indigenous people are dying.
So we don't defund police because
3
they actually
minutes.
do 3 or 4 cops.
We're dying. Where's the police at that, huh? We're dying.
Did you guys just see this? Hey, she's up.
Hands up! Hands up!
She just called right now. This is
Hands up!
Get him out!
And that's the stop.
Council members.
She got a right to protect
Back
us.
in the parlor, we're gonna clear the chambers.
It's your fault, Maria. It's your fault. That's all it is.
You're letting us die.
I'm so glad.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any other comments from council? Seeing none, the motion on the floor, will you please read it one more time, Madam Clerk?
Motion on the floor is to reduce the salaries and benefits line item in the police department general fund budget by $330,000 to be held in the general fund reserve balance to be used for community outreach and programs.
Council members, you may cast your vote.
A vote has been cast and the motion passes by a vote of 8 to 1. Voting against.
Any other comments from council regarding the budget as amended? Are there any other comments from council regarding the budget as amended? This is the final opportunity from the public regarding the budget as amended.
Madam Chair, this is the last time the public can say it.
Every councilman that sits up here, whether it's us or the next council, has to have the public holding them accountable all the time, or it
Hold
gets
yourself
complacent.
accountable.
So,
Hold your council members accountable.
I don't understand the experiences that a lot of people have spoke about tonight. I've seen it. I understand that it's happened, but I don't understand what it's like to be you and having experienced. But I can just tell you that from my perspective up here, we have been listening to you tonight and we hear you, and we are going to do what we say. I'm going to do what I say. So I'll speak for myself, but I trust my colleagues up here that are going to follow through with the things we've said tonight. And it's not enough tonight. It's a very small gesture what we've been able to do with the budget tonight. But a $300 million city budget takes a little bit to get it right, and we will. This conversation, like I said before, has not been happening at City Hall ever in my experience. It's always been for more funding to the police and things like that. So we have started that conversation here tonight, and which means it can continue going on forever for the rest of Norman's future, in my opinion. So I appreciate all of you coming here and staying here all night long and getting up multiple times and telling us what you think needs to be done, because we need to hear it. And so that's it. That's all I got. Thank you.
It also happens every single month. I chair the oversight committee. It happens every single month. We range the gamut on all kinds of topics, and anytime you can email me and say, hey, I think this is a topic that we didn't really touch on last month, and I think we need to this time. Do you want us to ban the use of civil asset forfeiture money in the city of Norman? Let's talk about it. I've got 12 agendas a year, and typically they are not short. They run anywhere from 2 to 4 hours in length, so bring your snacks. But that also means that there's a lot of time and room to talk about these issues. Not just once, but every single month. So I really appreciate everyone sticking it out with us. We're gonna start this tomorrow. I mean, I've got my list of research topics. I'm gonna get with staff in the morning, and we're gonna start talking about what we're gonna be presenting in July and how we can start taking the first steps forward on this. So I will see you all then. Email me at ward1@normanok.gov anytime. My cell phone number is also up on the city website, but I'll tell it to you here: 405-652-9444. Preferably text, but you're always welcome to call. And I'll get working on this stuff. We all will. I know that for a fact. Every single one of us up here is going to follow through on this. And so I want you to hold me to those words and hold all of us to it as well.